and thank you for joining us. We're going to wait just a minute until other folks join us, so we'll be starting shortly. Oh. Well, I think we'll get started. Aloha. My name is Lori Admiral. I'm the Director of Philanthropy for the Nature Conservancy's Hawaii chapter. Mahalo for joining our Conversation on Conservation webinar series. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. You are muted to reduce background noise, but if at any time you'd like to submit a question or comment, please click on the chat button. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll answer some of those questions towards the end. We are recording this conversation and we'll share it with you afterwards. If we aren't able to get to all the questions, we'll compile and send information when we share the recording. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sam Ohu Gon III, our Senior Scientist and Cultural Advisor. Sam was born and raised in Hawaii and received his bachelor's degree in zoology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, his master's in zoology and doctorate in animal behavior at the University of California at Davis. Sam has worked at the Nature Conservancy for nearly our entire 40-year history in Hawaii, serving as our ecologist and director of science before his current role, through which he continues to guide our science while enhancing our mission with his cultural expertise. After more than 12 years of study and training in Oli and Hula, Sam completed his uniki, or traditional rite of passage, in February 2003 as a practitioner of Hawaiian chant and protocol. Sam's knowledge of Hawaiian culture and history are an important asset when working with local communities and land management agencies here in Hawaii. He has shared his conservation expertise well beyond Hawaii with national and international communities. He is truly a treasure, and we are so fortunate to have him on our team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Mahalo, Laurie, and aloha to all of us. You ho ia ve la kai tana hele hele ho aka na no ia tu ai walo no e ho ime no ano hai. So greetings to all of us with a chant of aloha from our native forested uplands. And if I may, I'd like to start by acknowledging my training in dual worlds. I graduated from Western Academia as a PhD ecologist and animal behaviorist. I've enjoyed a 40-year career in conservation biology, most of it with the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii. I was also traditionally trained by a renowned master of Hawaiian chant and ceremony, Kumujan Keola Maka'ainana Lake, who put me through the traditional rites of passage to emerge as a kahuna ka kalaleo, a Hawaiian chant practitioner. This dual training is a pivotal factor in exploring the relationships of humans and nature through a biocultural lens in an archipelago that can serve as a model for the world. Biocultural conservation is a progressive approach that recognizes and honors the intrinsic relationships between nature and humanity and builds conservation efforts that are not only based on the best available science, but grounded in cultural knowledge, values, and practices, and aligned with community priorities. Instead of viewing people as separate from nature, this people in nature approach leads to long-term success because it involves the communities connected to the natural resources of concern and builds a broad community of support for conservation. It turns out that Hawaii's biological and ecological richness makes this approach especially compelling here. Indeed, the Hawaiian Islands can boast more ecological diversity in one specific location than any other place on Earth. And I've had the great honor and joy of exploring this diversity from end to end of the island chain. From geologically fresh and uncarved gentle slopes on Mauna Loa to the highest sea cliffs in the world on the north coast of Molokai. From lands that were created just this morning, barren and devoid of life, to climax forests supporting thousands of species. From cinder lands as dry as any of the world's deserts to arguably the wettest spot on Earth at Waialeale. From coastal dunes at sea level in our Mo'omomi Preserve to snow-capped volcanic summits just shy of 14,000 feet. It turns out that Hawaii is the single most habitat diverse location on the planet. And put more directly, if you had to choose one location on Earth to represent the full range of the planet's ecosystems, it would be Hawaii. The idea emerges that just about any terrestrial life form on Earth could find its optimal conditions, its sweet spot, so to speak, somewhere in the Hawaiian Islands. Couple this remarkable habitat diversity with extreme isolation, and you find species that evolved here like none other on the planet, co-adapted and balanced and forming an amazing array of ecosystems. Such an incredibly rich and distinctive array of species and ecosystems make Hawaii a biocultural world treasure. But why does biological richness equate to cultural richness? It's because that same dynamic biotic richness also meant awesome opportunities for our Hawaiian ancestors who arrived in the islands about 1,000 years ago. For a millennium, they not only survived, but thrived in isolation in the middle of the Pacific, achieving population densities rivaling those of today, yet entirely independent from the rest of the world. In Hawaii, they created one of the pinnacles of Polynesian societies, excelling at a wide range of arts, via 1,000 years of fine-tuning to this amazingly diverse island environment, achieving a remarkably small human footprint while enjoying sustained, self-sufficient abundance. That biological richness provided for all material needs, aesthetic and spiritual expressions, and intellectual and moral foundations of Hawaiian society. There are far too many examples of the cultural significance of our native species to share. You could spend a lifetime exploring them. But let's look at a couple of examples here. Perhaps our forest birds provide one of the most brilliant examples. In the times of pre-contact abundance, the feathers of our forest birds were a symbol of highest status. Their brilliant colors directly link the chiefly elite class with the Wawakua, the realm of the gods. I'iwi provided the red, Mamo and O'o provided both yellow and black, and O'u provided green. Today, all but the I'iwi are extinct, destroyed not by feather hunters, but by bird diseases spread by introduced mosquitoes, as well as wholesale destruction of the lowland native forest ecosystems. The story of our birds' role in providing one of the most well-recognized Hawaiian symbols is a compelling biological connection of nature to people and provides powerful motivation for their protection and recovery. Similarly, the cultural significance of our dominant wet forest tree, Ohi'a Lehua, can augment its ecological significance as the backbone of our watersheds, as well as the mainstay for our Hawaiian forest birds, such as this apapane. And because Ohi'a was the dominant tree of the Wawakua, it was considered a physical manifestation of the major Hawaiian god Ku. A large Ohi'a tree possessed such high mana that a tree harvested ceremonially, destined to be carved into an image of Ku, would demand a human sacrifice. The lehua, the blossom of the Ohi'a tree, typically crimson red, was also the term used for the first warrior to fall in battle, or the standout expert in any practice, such as hula. So in rapid Ohi'a death that introduced fungus killing hundreds of thousands of trees on Hawaii Island began its terrible spread, the Nature Conservancy worked with the Department of Agriculture, the news media, and the organizers of the Merry Monarch Hula Festival on a campaign to help prevent the spread of rapid Ohi'a death by showcasing its biocultural importance and spotlighting the role of Hawaiian practitioners in helping control the disease. I personally contacted important kumuhula on Hawaii Island, and they took up the charge, becoming powerful allies in the cause of controlling this great threat to our vital native watersheds. But biocultural conservation is not just public outreach. It can show us that the way things are now need not be the only way, and that there are important lessons to be learned from other cultures. Our Hawaiian Footprint Project, a joint effort of the Nature Conservancy and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, created the most accurate mapping of human presence in Hawaii at a time before contact with the outside world. It merged Western science and multiple disciplines with recorded Hawaiian oral traditions and demonstrated that despite supporting hundreds of thousands of people, the impact footprint on Oahu, for example, was less than 15% of the total land area after 1,000 years of active presence. It contrasts so starkly with our footprint of today. A scant 240 years since Cook encountered the islands in 1778, and 85% of our native ecosystem cover has been lost on Oahu. And at the same time, our self-sufficiency has plummeted to 15%. That means that 85% or more of our needs and goods are imported these days. And without that constant input, a mere 3 weeks from famine are we. Biocultural approaches explore and recognize the cultural practices that benefit conservation and inform and guide our efforts by integrating the best aspects of Indigenous land management. And the most famous of Hawaiian management practices is ahupua'a management. The ahupua'a is a socio-ecological unit of land designed to meet the material and cultural needs of the human community living within it, while minimizing resource conflicts between neighboring human communities. Much of what we know about the ancient ahupua'a system was recorded in Hawaiian, as reflected by the terms for the physiognomic and topographic features shown here. Such details from the summit of the highest mauna to the malolo zone of the outer reefs are an indication of the attention to environmental details that were required for sustainable living. The boundaries of the ahupua'a were delineated largely by natural features, such as ridge lines defining a valley watershed. As a rule, those boundaries shown in the red dashed lines here ran from the apex of the summit of the island downward beyond the shoreline out to the edge of the open ocean. They did so because Hawaiians were and are an oceanic people, deriving much from the sea, recognizing the connections between land and sea, and treating the ecosystems and habitats of the sea and the land with equal attention and resolution. Here I've provided the English equivalents of the physiognomic and human infrastructure features. So whether ahupua'a residents wanted to go fishing or grow crops or gather medicinal herbs, they did not have to go beyond the boundaries of their ahupua'a. The ahupua'a was the basic land unit nested within larger units which matched the stratified society of Hawaii in pre-contact times, with the li'inui and kahunanui, the high chief and high priest overseeing the entire island, a small set of ali'iai moku, district chiefs that held sway over the moku, or large districts in the island, the bold white boundaries here. Various other kahuna with specialized skills and knowledge lent them authority over either special management areas, such as outstanding fisheries, but especially as resource experts for specific ahupua'a. These experts were called konohiki, and they were the ones that interacted most often with the maka'ainana, the common people, because they presided over the ahupua'a in which they lived. Their authority was based on knowledge. Each ahupua'a's resources and special features were best known by the konohiki of that ahupua'a, who had been trained since childhood to know those resources. So they had unquestioned authority to impose kapu, sacred restrictions on human use of specific resources as needed. The knowledge did not stop at the ahupua'a boundary, since each konohiki would also need to know the resource status of neighboring ahupua'a. And this knowledge was passed on upward through the hierarchy of ali'i and kahuna, so that a high chief of an island would know which konohiki to contact if there was a need for a particular resource. It was an elegant indigenous knowledge network non-existent in Hawaii today, a network that biocultural training and approaches are attempting to rebuild. So the biocultural lessons of the ahupua'a that the Nature Conservancy applies in our work, especially in our Hawaii Marine program, include recognizing the necessity of land-sea connections in conservation, affirming the importance of place-based expertise of communities, taking advantage of knowledge networks that inform the whole, integrating economy and society with ecosystem health, and imposing necessary restrictions guided by the health of those ecosystems. The Conservancy's work with the lineal and cultural descendants of the lands and seas of Kiholo and Kona embodies many of these principles and has created a strong partnership with community there in the management of the resources of this one of our newest preserves connecting land and sea. But even our terrestrial work, protecting forested watersheds, is an extension of traditional patterns of land use management. Because in the traditional Hawaiian worldview, there was a dichotomy. The realm of people, the wau kanaka, occupied the lowlands where that which grows is a result of human effort. And above this comfortable lowland zone was the wauakua, the realm of the gods, where human effort had nothing to do with the verdant growth of native forests from which the waters of life flowed. The native upland forests of the wauakua were considered intensely sacred and perilous for human incursion. The kapu placed on human entry into the wauakua, the realm of the gods, preserved essential ecosystem services for the waukanaka, the realm of people below. But the respect afforded the wauakua was more than a fear of godly wrath. Aumakua are ancestral gods, and Hawaiians hold that aumakua can take the form of native plants and animals. Such a form is a kinolo, a physical manifestation of a deity. And just about any feature of the natural world can be a kinolo. So when the gods are also your family and the elements of nature their physical presence, your fundamental relationship with nature is transformed. Seeing all living things as connected to us as family brings something to our lives that is so very much richer than thinking of ourselves as consumers and the world as made up of commodities. Another fundamental worldview element is summed up in a well-known olelo no ea, or wise saying in Hawaii. The land is the chief, the people mere servants. This placement of people as subservient to the land in a strongly stratified Polynesian society points to the primacy of the natural world in the actions of people, and was almost certainly the driving context of pre-contact sustainability in Hawaii. We can surmise this when we document what happened when the worldview, knowledge, values, and practices were lost and replaced. The powerful lessons and models that Hawaiian culture provide to our conservation efforts today were built over the centuries, but much was lost in the great epidemics of the 1800s and the social upheavals that came with Western contact. Thus, engaging in biocultural conservation requires examining the changes that occurred to culture and the relationship of people to their places over time, and how those cultural changes affect the ecology of a place through history. In Hawaii, we know that post-contact history has not been kind to either Hawaiian ecosystems or Hawaiian culture. This engraving is instructive. The caption reads, "A missionary preaching in Hawaii, one of the Sandwich Islands, 1823. With Western contact came a radical shift in Hawaiian worldview, and with it, loss of the complex kapu system, an introduction of the concepts of ownership of land and the commodification of nature. This allowed for introduction of alien species and land use practices that might have been tolerable in a continental setting, but were entirely destructive in a limited island ecosystem. By 1870, a century after Western contact, we saw widespread loss of ecosystem integrity by the spread of non-native ungulates introduced less than a century beforehand. Hoofed animals such as cattle, goats, and sheep, and their wholesale denudation of the lowlands created a watershed crisis so bad it triggered the establishment of the forest reserve system here in Hawaii over a century ago in 1903. Monocrop sugar and pineapple followed in the 1800s and 1900s, bringing to the islands this extreme example of a land use that essentially erases all native biocultural diversity immediately and irrevocably. Following statehood in 1960, agriculture stepped aside for tourism and construction, a trend that continues today. If Hawaii's history was more like that of North America, we might have lost all of the knowledge that created island sustainability. But the Hawaiian kingdom that persisted to the end of the 19th century meant a continuity of indigenous knowledge and values, albeit under duress of great pressures to change. How fortunate then that we are gifted in Hawaii with the largest single written archive of indigenous knowledge in the world, the Hawaiian language newspapers. Literally millions of pages of text describing in amazing detail both current events over the course of the 1800s and 1900s when a rapidly modernizing Hawaiian kingdom under the Kamehameha dynasty was one of the most literate populations on earth. These were a storehouse of traditional genealogies and written transcriptions of what had previously been pre-contact oral history, created out of a desperation caused by depopulation from disease and rapidly changing lifestyles and social norms. Hawaiians greatly valued knowledge, and the native scholars of those times realized that if that knowledge was not converted from oral form to a written form, it would certainly be completely lost. That is where, in addition to my schooling in evolution and ecology, my training in Hawaiian language and traditions enabled me to take a dive into deep history via transcribed oral tradition, delving into ancient knowledge sources in the original Hawaiian language, describing the islands, the people, and the practices as they were before 1778. And from them, descriptions of the agricultural areas, the fish ponds, the temple sites, the trails, the storied localities, the centers of chiefly governance, and other traditional areas of use. In short, biocultural conservation requires both linguistic and cultural literacy, because that which has been translated to date is but a small fraction of that which still lies undigitized, and that which has been digitized has largely remained untranslated. Moreover, reading the original Hawaiian offers a lens unfiltered by translations into English done at the time by Western scholars who often denigrated and minimized Hawaiian knowledge, values, and practices as primitive, unenlightened, and fated to disappear. But for all that we have lost in Hawaii in both biological and cultural dimensions, certain things persist. And of the traditional Hawaiian values, the one most globally recognized today is aloha. Aloha. Empathetic compassion, love. The aloha that you hold for family extends in Hawaiian thought to all the elements of nature around you in your aina, the lands of your place, and emerge as aloha aina, a deep appreciation and love of all the features of the land. You realize that you're not whole without your place, and the fate and health of your place is essential to your own fate, your own health. Cultures ebb and flow, and some are driven to extinction, just as rare endemic species might be. Hawaiian culture and language was thought to be on the road to oblivion in the 1960s, but the Hawaiian Renaissance that started in the 70s changed that trajectory. The epic first voyage of Hokule'a to Tahiti in 1976 was pivotal in that rebirth. When she arrived in Papeete Harbor to the throngs of thousands, it was clear that they had ignited the spark of a powerful cultural renaissance, instilling pride and hope in Hawaiians and Oceanian peoples, setting them on a course to recapture the traditional knowledge and skills that created both ecological sustainability and a remarkably rich society. Some 40 years later, Hokule'a returned from a voyage around the world, the Mālama Honua voyage, spreading aloha and a call to care for our planet, our island, our canoe. I had the honor of being on crew for part of that 3-year mission, invited by Nainoa Thompson, longtime supporter of the Conservancy's work, because he recognized the Conservancy's reputation in ecosystem protection, but also because he knew that I could also contribute to the deeply cultural aspects of aloha aina when we visited culturally powerful places, such as Aotearoa or Rapa Nui. During that voyage, we all knew that we needed to clearly demonstrate that the Hawaiian values and relationships we shared are indeed a worthy model for our island Earth. Just last fall, Kavika and I were asked by the journal American Scientist to submit a manuscript on what biocultural conservation might mean. And it was an opportunity to talk about Hawaii as a potential model for world sustainability, and how this model might have never been if not for the Hawaiian Renaissance, whose growth is now extending into the realm of conservation. As we were developing the article, the editors asked for a working title, and I glibly submitted the title that you see here, thinking that of course it would be changed to something else on publication. But apparently the points made in the article were compelling, and the editors kept it. Moreover, at the start of 2020, they informed us that our article, among hundreds published by them in the course of 2019, was the second most popular article that year. Confirmation to me that biocultural conservation is an approach that has appeal and utility to more than just us, and it encourages me greatly. And we can expect to see more. A special issue of the journal Sustainability was recently devoted entirely to the biocultural restoration in Hawaii. And as you can see, Ulalia, Steph Tom, and I were contributors, sharing the Conservancy's work and approach, along with many of our colleagues in conservation and restoration. It underscores that the biocultural approach is a growing movement toward melding culture and conservation powerfully. As a conservation biologist and a Hawaiian cultural practitioner, I maintain hope that a changing world does not equate to inevitable loss of all that we value. Biocultural conservation says that we can move forward with the best that science can offer in renewable energy, food production, and conservation biology to undo the damage of the past and restore the health of our ecosystems, basing our actions on the best of ancient values, values that ring true, especially today. Lessons of island self-sufficiency, reverent relationships between people and the lands and waters that sustain them, and between each other as collective kahu, caretakers of the planet. So in addition to the Conservancy's vital on-the-ground management, we recognize that we must also raise the consciousness of those around us, even as we raise our own, to understand the full sacredness of our world and our relationship with it, doing all we can to lighten our collective footprint. Without that, the world is heading to a place we all do not want to be. But with those relationships and with those values, we can embrace the things that make us unique and beautiful and spread that around the world instead, so that no matter where you are, that which makes your place unique and beautiful becomes the source of your aloha aina. And so bearing that in your mind and hearts today and always, aloha.
Mahalo, Sam. Let's take some questions. Okay. Sam, what would you like to see biocultural conservation in Hawaii look like in 10 to 20 years? And what role do you see for TNC Hawaii in that vision?
Well, certainly one of the models that we were talking about as really important to biocultural conservation is the ahupua'a. And so we started off as a terrestrial conservation organization. We were largely land-based. We went up to the tops of the mountains, far from where people were. We recognized that protecting those places was really important as vital watershed and as the storehouse of remaining biological diversity. And then we started our marine program, which also recognized that there's a huge amount of biocultural diversity in the ocean and in our near-shore waters. But connecting those two is the key to ahupua'a management. And we've already begun that kind of work in He'eia, working to restore Hawaiian traditional agriculture as a means of controlling sedimentation. We also recognize that the island of Molokai has noted that among their most important economic actions, the action that they chose to take was to conserve their watersheds. And that confirmed that community concerns are important and that our work there match community concerns. Now we're working to see what we can do about the middle lands, the lands that we occupy, our farmlands, places we live, lands that no longer might be native dominated and yet are important connectors between the Mauka lands that we have worked traditionally and our marine ecosystems. So in 10 years, I want to see more and more examples of ahupua'a revival on all of our islands. And we are already taking steps where we work to see what the potential is in pursuing those.
Mahalo. Here's another one. What are examples of Hawaiian words or concepts that do an especially good job of capturing the interracial relationship between culture and ecology? For example, ahupua'a or kapu.
Well, you know, what's interesting is that about 10 years ago, in fact, 10 years ago, the Hawaii Conservation Alliance, where I serve as the TNC rep, the Conservation Alliance is a group of 25 or more federal, state, county, educational institutions, and private landowners, all of whom play a vital role in protecting our lands and waters. And when we started, we were largely just National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Nature Conservancy, state DLNR. But as we grew, I, among others, recognized that it was important to include large landowners, large Hawaiian institutions, like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and Kamehameha Schools. And once they were on board, we were able to forge a position paper that all 25 organizations and agencies could sign off on, which is an amazing thing when you think about how hard it is to get anybody to agree on anything nowadays. And we created a position paper called Hawaiian Culture in Hawaiian Conservation. And among the arguments that we placed were arguments that dealt with values. And I remember I said that ike, knowledge, was really important in Hawaiian tradition. Knowledge was the basis of all decisions, and that knowledge came from generations of accumulated observations of the land. So ike is one. There's all kinds of Hawaiian values. And I said aloha aina, of course, is another. Ahupua'a management. And in fact, nowadays, they're expanding ahupua'a to call it a moku system of management, because all of those ahupua'a are nested within the larger districts. And those districts together determine the management of all of the resources of an island. So exploring those kinds of words, as soon as you get into ahupua'a management and you get into the values that underlie Hawaiian ancient Hawaiian sustainability, the list gets longer and longer and longer.
Here's a good one. Are there any opportunities as a result of the recent economic downturn due to COVID-19 to revision Hawaii's economy to better reflect biocultural values?
I certainly think so. I think that what has become clear is how vulnerable we are and how, as I mentioned, 3 weeks, if the ships were to stop. I mean, remember the run on toilet paper that occurred just at the start of the COVID-19 crisis here, and how people were dealing with their isolation from each other and from the land. One of the first things that happened when the trails reopened was people went in large numbers up into our mountains to reconnect with those places that were important. And I think people woke up to the idea of how important those places, land and sea, are to our well-being. Not only can you point to all of the economic and ecosystem services things, but just our definition of who we are as Hawaii people is in large part determined that way. So I think that COVID-19 has allowed us to re-envision what we do with our agricultural lands, how we can accelerate our self-sustainability, how we need to focus on protecting those things which keep our water supply and our food security alive and healthy. And a large part of that is protecting the native resources that we have both above us and below us.
Sam, can you share a story of how a biocultural approach has enabled TNC to do more for conserving Hawaii's lands and waters?
Wow. There are quite a few. I mean, I've had some remarkably spiritual experiences just in the course of being in the Wawakua. I remember being on the island of Kaho'olawe when it was still the Conveyance Commission, and the Reserve Commission didn't even exist yet because the reserve did not yet exist. And we had gathered together a group of people, some working on the cultural resource management of the island, some working on the natural resource management of the island. And we were all cloistered in Hanakanaia Bay. And the place was still dangerous, right? I mean, even now, they've only cleared a relatively small part of the island to be safe for human traffic. And so we were forbidden to leave the barracks, especially at night when you can't see where you're going. But one morning, maybe about 4:30 or 5, it was still dark outside. I needed to use the bathroom, so I got out of the barracks and I went to the outhouse that was just up the hill and between the barracks and the helipad, which was higher up the road. And after that, this was at a time when Kumu Lake was teaching us various chants, and the chant that he had taught us most recently was a pre-dawn chant done by the head of household to the aumakua of the family. And if you don't know, Kumu Lake's aumakua, one of the most important kinolau physical forms that they take is the owl, the pueo. So I was, after I had done my business, I decided to violate the rules. Don't tell anybody. And besides, it's after the statute of limitations. I snuck up that road to the helipad. I figured the road has been cleared, the helipad has been cleared, it's safe to do that. I walked up to the helipad and stood there on the high point of the hill and looked to the east where the dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. And I began that chant to the aumakua of the early morning. And as I started the chant, I became aware of dark shapes in the air around me, and they were circling around. At first I saw just 1 or 2, and then I realized that there were 4 pueo that were circling, perhaps attracted by the sound of the chanting. But they were circling around as I chanted, and it moved me so deeply that I almost couldn't finish the chant. But the kapu that Kumu Lake had taught us was, once you start the chant, you must finish it correctly and entirely, and then you can lift the kapu of presenting the chant. And so I was able to finish that, and then I watched them in silence as they circled around me, and the circles got larger and larger, and finally they disappeared into the distance. And I walked back down to the barracks, pretty much stunned. But after that, there was the radical idea among several of us there, and it was certainly underscored by my experience up there, that we shouldn't have 2 groups, one doing cultural resources and one doing natural resources, but we need to combine the natural and cultural resources of the island and consider them as one. Because the pueo to a zoologist might be an important thing, to an ornithologist, but to a non-Hawaiian up there, the pueo might be a relatively low priority element for restoration of the island. And yet the pueo would be regarded with extreme regard by Native Hawaiian botanists or Native Hawaiian archaeologists or a Hawaiian zoologists. And so it became clear that the context for what we do in our work is extremely important, and that things that might seem unimportant to people might be the pivotal factor in making a change in the trajectory of things. And so now when you look at the management plan for Kaho'olawe, there was a strong effort to integrate the natural and cultural resources. The Nature Conservancy, of course, was contracted to do the biological survey of Kaho'olawe, and I led that team, and it was an amazing experience, spending a lot of time on that island in places where people cannot normally go, accompanied everywhere by the ordnance, the explosive ordnance folks. But that was just one example. There's so many other stories I could tell you, but we don't have the time.
Sam, what other nations or communities around the world are taking a similar biocultural approach to conservation?
You know, that's the amazing thing, is that the Conservancy, not only in Hawaii, but elsewhere, is recognizing the importance of Indigenous peoples' knowledge, values, and practices in the conservation of nature. The UN acknowledged that 30% or more of the world's most valuable natural areas are those areas that have been longest under Indigenous management. And that's an amazing statement to make. the United Nations has in their set of protections for Indigenous peoples and local communities has made it important for the Nature Conservancy, because we're an international organization, to recognize the rights and the values and the practices of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And so we now have working groups, and I've been invited to take part in that international effort to integrate cultural concerns with our conservation mission. It's something that I enjoy doing, and sharing stories of North American First Peoples and peoples in Africa and even Mongolia at one of the settings that meetings that we had recently tells me that this is a unifying thing. It's not something, this diversity, ironically, is a powerful unifier.
I think we have time for one last question. What has TNC Hawaii learned from taking a biocultural approach to conservation?
Well, certainly it's taught us many, many things. For me, it's been an extremely enriching thing. When I go into the forest, I can rattle off the scientific names of things of plants and animals there, but I can also talk about what significance they have and why they're personally important. Part of the personal importance of anyone who lives in Hawaii is to know your place really well. And the Conservancy has a reputation of being knowledge-based. We used to say science-driven, and now in this biocultural world, we get to say knowledge-driven, because we can take knowledge in many forms. And wielding that means that you have more than just a single source to work with. I was going someplace with that, and now the thread has flown away. What was the question again?
What has TNC Hawaii learned from taking a biocultural?
Yeah. And so, of course, our marine community efforts take the essence of that, recognizing that communities come with generations of knowledge sometimes, many times in fact, and that to ignore that and just to come in and say that and presume that you know more than these communities, or that what we come in with, the tool set that we have, is all that we can bring to bear to conservation. We have learned that it is far better to work with those communities, learn with them about the ecosystems and the species that are important to all of us, and to work together and combine that knowledge.
Mahalo, Sam. I think that's the end of our questions. Want to say mahalo to all of you for taking the time to join our conversation on conservation with Dr. Sam Gon. Hope you enjoyed learning more about the biocultural aspects of our work at the Nature Conservancy. This is a very important initiative for us, and if you're interested in supporting it or learning more, please let us know. We'll send you a recording of this webinar and would welcome your feedback or your questions for us. Please join us on, sorry?
No, keep going.
Just want to let everyone know that our next webinar will be on June 10th. Our conversation on conservation featuring Palmyra Atoll. Mahalo again for joining today, everyone, and for your dedicated support of the Nature Conservancy. Have a wonderful evening, and aloha.
Yes, aloha to us all. And I'll try to take a look at all the questions that we didn't have time to answer, and try to grab answers for you.
Great.